So I am Alex Arteaga. We are in the German Pavilion in Barcelona, so the building of Mies van der Rohe. I would like to talk about the installation, the sound installation I made in this, in and for this pavilion, which is part of the research project Transient Senses. Before I talk about the installation, I would talk about the framework in which this installation was conceived. This framework is a research environment called Architecture of Embodiment that I developed in the, or at the Berlin University of the Arts with support of the Einstein Foundation with an Einstein Junior Fellowship. The whole project, the big project, Architecture of Embodiment, is a research project about architecture as condition of the emergence of sense. It's the first time, as far as I know, that architecture is researched in a paradigm of embodiment theories, and more concretely on referring to one specific form of embodiment theories called enactivism. Just in this framework, the question of the project makes sense. I mean, the idea of how does architecture, how does the built environment can be understood as a condition of the emergence of sense. Transient Senses is one of what I call research cells. It's one of the projects of this environment. And Transient Senses is specifically conceived and realized for this building, for the German Pavilion. The basic ideas, there are some basic hypotheses actually in the development of, in the conception and development of Transient Senses. One is that the pavilion is an apparatus to think architecture. I'm not the first one who said that, but I refer this thinking architecture to what we can call an aesthetic thinking. So experience-based, bodily, immediate thinking in the pavilion. And in this sense, and on this framework is where the second hypothesis, which is maybe my most genuine working hypothesis, is developed. And the idea is, the concept is that this construction allows a very specific relationship between inside and outside space. Or if I merge both ideas, the idea of the pavilion being an apparatus to think architecture, and the idea of the pavilion being a space where, or a construction where a very particular concept and experience and relation between inside and outside is possible, I would say that this pavilion is an environment in which these two categories, inside and outside space, these two perceptual categories, can be thought in a very particular way. On this base, I developed the 4 formats. So this project, Transient Senses, in 4 formats: 1 sound installation here in the pavilion, and 3 essays in different media. 1 sound essay, 1 text essay, and 1 video essay. There is a 5th part of the project, which is an international research seminar in 2 parts. But today I'm going to refer more about, I'm going to talk more about the installation. The installation is a very reduced one. It's working with very reduced tools. We have here in the pavilion 4 speakers, 4 OmniWave speakers from Blumlein. These are the very special speakers developed in order to create a very diffuse sound field, a subwoofer, and a computer with a max MSP patch controlling the whole installation. There are 4 pairs of microphones installed on the what we could call the limits of what we could call the inside space of the pavilion. The sound from these microphones go direct to the computer, and we define 3 kinds of processes in real time in order to vary dynamically the sounds already present in the pavilion and in its environment. One very important thing is that we are not adding sounds. There is no sounding here which is not present in the pavilion without the installation. And the principles of, or the concepts of the real-time transformation are also principles of the pavilion. As I said, there are 3. The most simple one is affecting the routing. So in some moments, I will talk later about the time structure of the installation. In some moments, the sound change, or there's a change in the relationship between the place where the sound is produced and the place where the sound is reproduced. Normally, it's like direct. I mean, the sounds are reproduced by the speakers from the same direction they are produced, but in some moments, this direction change in both dimensions. Right goes to left, left goes to right, and front and back change mutually. The second transformation, there are then 2 spectral transformations. One is, conceptually I would say, one is changing the thickness of the walls. We're making the walls thicker or thinner. This means so technically in audio technique, like change the function of transmission of the walls. Yeah, so the walls can be auditory transparent, or they can be thicker. That means we have more or less contact to what is happening outside. We are working with transparency, which is a concept that Mies van der Rohe was also using, but just visually. We are working with the same principle of transparency, but auditorily. The second process in real time affects against the limits of the walls of the pavilion, but more in the inside perspective. And what we do is to increase, again in a conceptual explanation, we increase the inwardness of the pavilion, or we increase the outwardness of the pavilion, which means that we reinforce the own frequencies of the pavilion or not. These 3 changes, these 3 variations of these 3 transformations are controlled automatically by random processes, controlled random processes, so they are running the whole time, changing dynamically, but in a control way. And the way we control it is like giving to the random machine some ranges of time, in which, and some values, some ranges in the values of these parameters, and we wrote a program that manage time and values of these parameters of these transformations in time. There is just one other thing, which is Generalpause, so a pause of the whole system. There are some windows of time in which the system doesn't work or stop. So we leave the sound of the pavilion be the sound it is. As you maybe can imagine, the difference between the installation working and not working is not so big, because you continue hearing the thing. But what you hear is then different kinds of variation regarding the inwardness and outwardness of the sounds already present in the pavilion. The general idea is to reinforce the spatial ambivalence, the ambiguity of the space. Ambiguity which is already there, which is defined by the own construction of the pavilion, which is already available, and what we wanted to do, and I think what we achieve is to reinforce, to make this ambiguity even more available on an auditory dimension. The idea in the distribution of the elements in the Tapias foundation, and also here is the same idea, is the very basic idea, also not only of transient senses but also of architecture of embodiment. And the idea is to create a field with artifacts, and the idea is that you move in between, you go from one to the other. You go from the video essay to the text essay, you read a little bit, maybe you want to come back to see the video, maybe you decide to read again or to go and listen the sound essay, maybe you decide to come back to the pavilion. And my idea is that in this back and forth, in the spaces in between, is where and is how knowledge about how these two perceptual categories, inside and outside space, arise. Okay, the general idea, I mean, it's a kind of research approach in architecture of embodiment, is that you don't find the knowledge is not contained in the artifacts, but knowledge is produced or emerges in the spaces in between, activating thinking through your interaction with the artifacts.